Hi everyone, welcome back to another very exciting Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge. I am your host, Jesus Ramirez. How are you guys doing today? I see a lot of familiar faces in the chat already. We have Sam, Austin, Danny, Light Maniac, Matt, Baldiers, Susan. How are you guys doing today? Great to see you all. Awesome. Let me just scroll up and see if there's any questions. I just saw there's somebody from Cambodia. Tarak from Cambodia. Awesome. Good to see you in the chat. Let me know, guys. Let me know where you guys are watching from. Hey, Alberto. Good to see you in the chat as always. Today we're going to be working on another awesome Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge. This is the first one. We're going to work on portrait retouching, but we're going to focus on using blending modes to enhance your portraits. So if this is the first time that you're joining us or the first time that you're joining a Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge, a very important page for you to know, and let me switch over into my computer, is this page right here, the behance.net/challenge/Photoshop page. And from here, you'll be able to download the file that I'm going to use today so that you can follow along, and then you can work on your own photos using the techniques that you learned with me today. So like I said, today is the very first challenge. So if you scroll down, you'll see that we've unlocked this very first challenge, polishing portraits, and we're going to improve our portraits using blending modes and retouching techniques. So that's what we're going to be working on today. So make sure that you click on the Get Started button here. That will take you into this Dropbox folder, and make sure that you download this Photoshop PSD file with the guy wearing that jean jacket. Now, if you downloaded this file about an hour ago, the file has changed. I had to update the file, so make sure that you upload the right file. If you see a guy wearing a blue jean jacket, then you have the right file. So the guy wearing the jean jacket. And once again, that's found under behance.net/challenge/Photoshop. And also, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you come over into behance.net/live so that I can read your comments. There's a lot of comments coming through. So let me make sure that there's no questions, that everything's all right. Good morning, Clarissa. Good to see you. Hi, Neil. Awesome. Oh, cool. This is a perfect lesson for Danny because he is editing photos of the kids. Awesome. Stoked. Great. I hope that the techniques that I'm going to show you today will help you out. Cool. I've never made Polish portraits. Awesome, Sean. Good play on words there. But anyway, so I see that Sam has posted the link in the chat to get the starter file. So make sure that you download the file so you can follow along with me. While you do that, I also wanted to point out the community chat. That is the Discord page. And let me click on this so it loads up. And all you have to do is click on this link that says community chat, and you'll be taken into our Adobe Photoshop Discord server here. And on the left hand side, you'll see the current challenge. And this is where you can post the work that you'll be working on with me. And you can see that some people started uploading the covers that we worked on yesterday. It wasn't really a challenge yesterday. I just showed people that you could create a cover for all your challenges for when you upload your projects into Behance. So thank you so much for submitting those covers. If you missed yesterday's stream, it was just a welcome screen, but I showed people how to bring back the old legacy patterns, styles, and what was the other thing? Gradients. So you could use those to create the covers. But anyway, this is under feedback here on the left hand side under current challenge. That's where you can submit the work that you create with me. And if you have any questions or comments, make sure that you leave them on there. I'll be there. The Adobe Live team will be there. The Adobe mentors will be there. Voodoo Sam, Valdier, we're all in here. So make sure that you submit your work into behance.net/challenge/Photoshop, and then click on community chat to go into Discord if you haven't already. So really great place to be. Also make sure that you submit your work into Behance by creating a project, and make sure that you use the hashtag PS Daily Challenge, because you can have an opportunity to be featured in our curated community projects gallery. So you can see some of the work that people have created using the daily creative challenges, not just the Photoshop ones, also the Illustrator and XD daily creative challenges. So you can come in here and check them out to get inspired if you like. Cool. Another thing I want to mention really quick, not related to the Daily Creative Challenge, but I recently created a webinar for Adobe. It's called Mastering Photoshop Essentials with me, Jesus Ramirez. So if you want to learn more about using Photoshop, you can come into this Creative Cloud page, sign up with your Adobe ID, and check out the 1-hour free webinar where I show you guys how to get started with Photoshop. So I'm going to paste that in the chat here. Let me just go into my own stream here and paste it in the chat so that you guys can have it. Oh wait, that's not me. I didn't click on my live stream there. Sorry guys. But anyway, so here I am, Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge, and I'll paste that in the chat. And there it is so that you guys can have a link to the webinar. And again, that's a 1-hour webinar with Adobe here at the Creative Cloud. It's 1 hour learning Photoshop, so you can watch that whenever you like. So make sure that you go to that page if you want to learn more about Photoshop. So before we get started, once more, I want to mention that if you haven't already, come into behance.net/challenge/Photoshop and download the file for the Polishing Portraits Daily Creative Challenge, which is what we're going to work on today. Click on Get Started, and we're going to work with that Photoshop file. Again, last time I'll mention it, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you switch over onto behance.net/live so that I can see your comments. I can't see your comments if you're on YouTube. Cool. But yeah, let me go into Photoshop, and this is the file that you guys should have on that Dropbox folder. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you different techniques that you can use to enhance your portraits that are related to blending mode. So the point is that there's a whole bunch of different retouching techniques, but the focus will be on blending modes. And before we get started, I want to differentiate two things. We're going to talk a little bit about color balance and color grading. So color balance simply means getting the white balance right. If the image looks too cold, we're going to try to balance that and make it look natural. In other words, if the grays, the neutral grays, are too cold or too hot, we're going to learn how to balance those. And also, the second thing is color grading. So color grading is applying a color style to your photo that may not necessarily be balanced, but it helps you tell a story. So two very different things, and you can use the same techniques I'm going to show you today for either or. The point of this challenge is for you to understand how the different tools that I'm going to show you work and how you can take them to the next level by using blending modes. All right, so that's what we're doing today. Awesome. Let me see if there are any questions. Cool. Thank you, Sam, for sharing the clickable Creative Cloud link for the webinar. It's in the chat if you guys are interested on checking that out later on today. After all the streams are done, you at least have 1 hour of a webinar that I did for Adobe and learning how to use some of the most important Photoshop tools for those of you that are just starting out. Awesome. Cool. So volume low again. Let me try to make the volume louder. Sorry about that. Let me know if that's any better. If it is, okay. So I'm talking and I'm just looking at the volumes here. Is that any better? Cool. But anyway, yeah, volume low. Let me know if the volume's cool. I think I made it louder. But anyway, so I'll just get started. And if it's still low, just let me know in the chat. So this is the image that we're going to work with. And one of the first things that I want to mention is skin tones, right? Like, how do we get skin tones to look right? How do we know if the skin tones are okay or not sure? We can kind of eyeball it and get a good idea of what skin tones should look like. But let me just show you one technique that allows you to use the numbers inside of Photoshop so that you can better understand how the skin tones work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this tool right here, the color sampler tool, which is nested under the eyedropper tool. When you select that tool, you can click anywhere on your image. So I'm just going to click here on his skin tone. And I also have 5x5 average. What that means is that Photoshop is not going to look at the pixel that I clicked on because that pixel could be misleading. Instead, I'm going to do a 5x5 pixel average of that area. That way, I get a more accurate color representation of what's going on in that area and not just one pixel. So what I'm going to do is now open up the info panel. in the info panel, you'll see here this number 1 that correlates to the little number 1 that's on that skin tone. And you'll notice the red, the green, and the blue channel. And you can see the values, 196, 182, and 187. And for skin tones, no matter the ethnicity or the person's, color of skin, you always want to make sure that the red is larger than the green and the green is larger than the blue, the value that's on there, whatever the value is. So notice that here, the blue is larger than the green. See that? 182 to 187. So what I need to do is bring down the blue channel color to get a more accurate skin tone. So let me show you how to do that. There's a lot of ways of doing it. I'm just going to show you one. So you can create a curves adjustment layer. And with the curves adjustment layer, you can select the channel that you want to adjust. In this case, we've already narrowed it down. The blue channel is way too strong, so we got to bring it back down so that we can get an accurate color representation. And what I can do is select the blue channel and then click on this little tool here, this little finger, and then I can click on that area where I sampled my color. You can see that there. When I click on there, notice that the curves adjustment layer placed the dot on there. Now, before I move the dot, I want to make sure that I don't affect the entire image. I just want to affect that general area. So what I'll do is I'll click here in the center to create a second dot. And now I can click on this original dot I created and adjust that. Here's a pro tip for you. If you use the minus or plus keys on the keyboard, you can go up and down on the points. See that? I have the top point selected. If I hit the minus key, I'll select the second point, minus key, the point in the middle, and then the minus key again, the point here way at the bottom. If I hit the plus key, it just goes up. So that's a quick way of moving between the points that you select in Photoshop. So if you're using the curves adjustment layer often and you want to switch between points quickly, use the minus and the plus key to go between points. Cool. Let me know in the chat if you knew that shortcut. But anyway, so now with the point selected, the one that corresponds to the skin tone here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring down the blue, and notice that as I press the down arrow key on the keyboard, the 84 or the original 87 changes corresponding to the amount the amount of times that I press on the down arrow key. So if I go down and make the blue lower than the green, I have corrected my skin tone. See that? Before and after. It's a subtle effect, but you can see that that blue cool color cast that this image had is now gone, and the skin tones look much more realistic. And you can adjust the other channels if you want. If you think that your skin needs maybe a little more red, for example, you can just click on that same spot, click on this point here, and then I can use the arrow keys on the keyboard to increase or decrease the color of that channel, and it affects that area accordingly. So you can see the before and the after. See that? See how the skin tone just looks much better, much more realistic? So that's because we made sure that the green channel had a larger value than that the red channel had a larger value than the green channel, and that the green channel had a larger value than the blue channel. And if you manage to do that, you're going to get more accurate skin tones rather than having, say, the blue channel larger than the green one or the green one larger than the red. I hope that makes sense. And oh cool, I have my good friend Teresa Jackson in the chat. Hey Teresa, how's it going? Teresa is down in San Diego, California. Good to see you in the chat, my friend. She is also an expert Photoshop user, Photoshop guru, and Adobe Max speaker. Good to see you, Teresa. But anyway, so now that I've made this adjustment, you might be wondering, well, didn't you title this class like blending modes or something? And where do the blending modes come in? Well, whenever you're using the curves adjustment layer, and I've just created a new curves adjustment layer to show you something. So when you create the curves adjustment layer and you make an adjustment to it, and obviously this is a very extreme adjustment, you inadvertently adjust the saturation of the image. Notice that if I change the blending mode from normal to luminosity, I don't affect the saturation, just the brightness of the image. And that's what I want to do technically on this adjustment layer. I don't want to affect anything else but the color. So what I'll do is I'll change the blending mode to color to make sure that I'm only affecting the color and I'm not affecting the brightness or anything else. So there you go, color. So that's where the blending mode comes in with this technique. Cool. So that is one blending mode technique that you can use with this particular adjustment layer. That's just to get your skin tones looking the right way. Another thing that you can do to an image like this one is, for example, increase the saturation of the image. So for example, if I can go into hue and saturation, I can bump up the saturation, and some areas look good, but not all areas look good, because saturation increases the saturation of all pixels equally. If you want a more controlled way of adding saturation to a photo, you can go into the vibrance adjustment layer, and from here you can increase the vibrance. So vibrance increases saturation, increases the saturation more of pixels that are not highly saturated, and it also protects skin tones, so you don't destroy the skin tones if you're working with portraits. So notice that I can bump up the vibrance all the way to the right, and maybe his sweater might be a little too saturated, but the rest of the image is not overly saturated. So this is a great technique that you can use to increase saturation. Also notice that the vibrance adjustment layer also has a saturation slider underneath, and you can also use that saturation to further enhance the saturation of all pixels at the same time. I wasn't gonna show this, but now that we're talking about the two different saturation adjustment layers, I want to point out that they're both not the same, even though they have the same name. So what I mean by that is, for example, notice this here. We have an HSL, hue, saturation, lightness. That's a color mode. Color mode is HSL. If I double click on the foreground color picker, we have a different color mode, HSB, hue, saturation, brightness. So although brightness and lightness are similar, they're not really the same thing. Hue is basically what color we're talking about, right? We're talking about red, magenta, blue, green, yellow, whatever color we're talking about. Saturation is the intensity of that color. So how intense is it? Is it extremely saturated or basically gray, no saturation? And brightness is how light or dark a color is. Now, in HSL, all that is very similar, but how the brightness is represented on screen is actually different. So let me show you, and again, this doesn't relate to anything, but I think that it's really important to understand, because then all these tools become so much more understandable to use once you know how they really work behind the scenes. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly create this gradient to show you guys. So I have this gradient here, right? And if I open up the info panel and just hover over it, let me just make sure that this right here, this color picker is in the HSB color mode. So when I run over it, you'll see that the only thing that changes is the saturation, right? I'm sorry, the hue. The saturation and brightness is exactly the same no matter what color I hover over, right? So if I go into the hue and saturation adjustment layer and reduce the saturation down to 0, what do you think will happen? What do you think the final result will be? Let's see. If I bring it down to 0, it's completely gray, right? That's because the saturation and the brightness is the same on all colors. The only thing that changes is the hue, right? But what happens when we do the same thing with the vibrance adjustment layer? What do you think will happen? Vibrance adjustment layer, let me reset it. We also have a saturation slider. So what do you think will happen? Notice that when I bring the saturation down with this slider, it no longer has the same shade of gray. But why? Well, the vibrance slider uses the HSB color mode and is designed to represent the way that we see color. So for humans, blue is darker than yellow, just the way that we perceive that color, right? So blue, when it's black and white, will look darker, and yellow will look brighter. With hue and saturation, the HSL color mode, that is more mathematical. So it's not the way that we see color. So basically, since the brightness is the same on all colors, then when it's black and white, it's going to look the same on all. So that's one of the reasons why in our portrait, I know it's a really long-winded way of saying it, in our portrait, when we increase the saturation with the hue and saturation adjustment layer, we got a vastly different result than when we increase the saturation in the vibrance adjustment layer. See the difference? So in my opinion, I would use the vibrance adjustment layer on your portraits, since it'll give you results that are more expected to what you're going to see with your eye, just because the color mode that was used to design this particular adjustment layer was the color mode was HSB, which is the color mode that more closely resembles our eyes, not HSL, hue, saturation, lightness, which is the color mode that is a little more mathematical, so to speak. And I know that, again, that's like really, really out there, but I wanted to talk about why those two sliders are named the same thing, and they sort of do the same thing, but they do it in slightly different ways. So cool. So now let's start talking a little bit more about blending modes, because I just spent like the last 5 minutes talking about the difference between HSL and HSB on the hue and saturation adjustment layer and the vibrance adjustment layer. So another way, ultimately what I was going to say is you can set your vibrance adjustment layer and just increase the vibrance, and then maybe also increase the saturation if you like. And if you want to, not necessary, you can change the blending mode to saturation so that only the saturation of the pixels below are affected. Here's another cool technique that you can use to enhance the brightness of an image. If you create a black and white adjustment layer, it'll obviously desaturate the image, right? No more color. And the way that this adjustment layer works is that when you drag on these sliders, you'll control the brightness of the original color. So remember, he was wearing a jean jacket and he was wearing jeans. So when I adjust the blue, then the jacket and the jeans obviously get darker and brighter depending on how I drag the slider. But if I change the blending mode to luminosity, the color comes back and I can adjust now the brightness of the specific colors with these sliders. See that? See how I'm controlling now the leaves, his skin, because there's a little bit of red in the skin, the yellows as well in the background, and those leaves, the green, you can see the green grass behind them. See that? See how I'm adjusting this? So now you have total control of how you can enhance the brightness of the image by using blending modes in this slider. Cool. Let me see if there's any questions, because I know I've been talking so much about all this stuff. Let me see. Any questions? Great pro trip. You're welcome. Gradient map. Gradient map uses the HSB color mode. Cool. Awesome. Chris from foggy San Francisco. That is where I'm from. Cool. Awesome, Teresa, for your compliment. Cool. So let's see, we have about 3 minutes. The next thing that I'm going to show you is I actually am going to disable the vibrance adjustment layer. And what I'm going to do is going to show you a technique that I like using for enhancing like articles of clothing and things like that. So basically, let's work with the jean jacket here. So I'm going to select the quick selection tool, and I'm going to click and drag and select his jacket. And I'm only going to do one side so that we can compare with the other, right? So then when we have the jacket selected, what I'm going to do is create a solid color adjustment layer, and I'm going to select the color of the jacket, right? So that's basically the color. And what I can do now is change the blending mode to overlay or soft light, depending on the image that you're working with, and that enhances that particular color like you see there. And I can double click on it and even adjust it even further, and that just sort of makes that particular article of clothing pop using the same color that you had there before, just by changing the blending mode to overlay. And again, soft light will do a softer effect, but overlay is one. So I could do the same thing on the other side now that I know that it works, and I can just paint with white on the layer mask like so, and that enhances that particular color like you see there. And obviously I'm going very quickly here because I don't have that much time. I'm gonna go into the solid color adjustment layer again, but I was gonna do the same thing with the sweater in here. So with the sweater selected, I'll select that same color, change it to overlay, and you can see how that enhances the sweater there. I have about 1 minute, so I just want to mention that in your projects now for the Daily Creative Challenge is to take your photos and try to neutralize the image, try to make the colors of the articles of clothing pop, try to get the right skin tone so that they look realistic, use the black and white adjustment layer to control the brightness and darkness of the items in the photo just to make them stand out more. And I look forward to see on Discord how you improve your portraits. What you can do is when you're done, maybe have a side-by-side before and after so that we can see what the original photo looked like and what you did to it to enhance it. I hope that this stream was beneficial to you. Let me know in the chat if you learned something, if you enjoyed the tips and tricks that I showed you today. Make sure that you stick around because we have a busy day. Let me show you guys the schedule. We have illustration coming up next. Then we have Andrew at 11:30 with a Illustrator DCC. We have Rachel coming in at noon for UI UX design systems. We have Andrea doing an XD Daily Creative Challenge, and we're going to end the day with Kathleen doing a draw along at 2:30 a.m. Pacific. So make sure that you stick around for all those streams. Again, don't forget to check out the webinar that I mentioned earlier for the Creative Cloud project that I was involved in. It's a 1-hour free Photoshop Mastering Essentials class. So make sure that you check that out. That is through Adobe, through the Creative Cloud. So make sure that you check that out. The link should be in the chat. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you being here with me today. I look forward to being back again with you tomorrow for another Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you guys again very soon. Bye. Thanks so much.